This is Arab Talk on KPOO 89.5 FM in San Francisco. This is Arab Talk with Jess and Jamal. I'm Jess Hanan.
And I'm Jamal Dejani.
Jamal, we have quite a busy show today. There's a lot going on. Just to summarize for our listeners who are keeping track, at our location in Northern California where we've been broadcasting Arab Talk, the pandemic, as all of our listeners and viewers may know, is raging out of control. We are essentially in lockdown mode in Northern California and the entire state because the ICU bed capacity in California has dropped essentially below 15%. We're entering an incredibly dangerous crisis state right now for COVID-19, Jamal. And unfortunately, I have bad news that in many parts of California, we may be on the verge of a collapse of the healthcare infrastructure as we know it. The next few months are going to be dark. They're going to be very dangerous. We encourage all of our viewers and listeners, wherever you are in the world, please wear a mask. Please be careful, because even though the vaccines are out, it's still going to be a rough couple of months. In spite of that, we still have a lot of news, Jamal. And as we spoke about last week, despite all the chaos in the United States with the transition from the Trump administration to the Biden administration, the Israelis continue, and Jared Kushner continue to be up to attempting to redraw yet again the political and now, to some extent, the geographical map of the Middle East and North Africa. We have breaking news on Morocco and the Israelis establishing or attempting to establish some diplomatic ties and normalization of relations in exchange for a very dirty deal of the United States supporting Morocco's claim to the Western Sahara. And then ongoing atrocities obviously continuing to go on in occupied Palestine, Jamal, with the Israelis continuing to shoot and kill and maim children in Palestine. It's been a very busy time.
That's right, Jess. We have a lot to talk about, and we're focusing this show today. We're going to be talking about the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, mostly, but starting with the breaking news. As you've said, Israel and Morocco have agreed to normalize relations. This is according to a tweet by President Donald Trump and then followed by a statement today. And as part of the deal announced, basically, the United States will recognize Morocco's claim over the disputed Western Sahara region. This is something that Morocco has been trying to achieve for many years.
Long time.
Yeah. And this is not a big surprise. Morocco has for years had informal ties with Israel. They actually established just interim peace accords. They established low-level diplomatic relations during the 1990s, following Israel's interim peace accords with the Palestinians. But then those ties were severed or suspended after the outbreak of the second Palestinian Intifada in 2000. So already Israel has had relations. And if anything, to tell you the truth, this will be the most meaningful relationship between Israel and an Arab state, because Israel has a very high number of Jewish population who originated from Morocco. And Morocco still has also Jewish population, so also in Tunisia. And so Israel has had, backdoor relationships even before the Palestinians started talking to the Israelis. But this kind of seals the deal, because the king wants that recognition. He's playing the same Israeli game, okay, which is basically anointing that the United States is the only empire in the entire world and can dictate and can grab land and whatever. Just like with the Israelis, all that they needed was for Donald Trump to say, "Oh, you can now annex the Golan Heights," right?
Right.
And
Right.
so, and the same thing telling Pompeo, slash Trump slash Kushner, etc., saying that you can now annex the land in the West Bank. So he's seeing this, that, oh, well, I don't need the United Nations. I don't need the rest of the world. I don't need, close to 200 countries in the world to recognize me. But if the United States says you can do it, I can do it.
Well, here's one of the problems, Jamal. It will be now that the United States is the only Western country that will support and acknowledge Morocco's claim of the Western Sahara. No other major Western power or country acknowledges Morocco's claim over the Western Sahara. There are large indigenous communities in the Western Sahara, Jamal, which have been, fighting for a very long time, for decades and decades and decades, for their own independence, separate from the Kingdom of Morocco. So the United States, yet again, will be bucking a trend to go against the general diplomatic trends of Western diplomacy. The other thing that's kind of a big deal, Jamal, is that Morocco will agree to let Israeli airplanes fly over Moroccan airspace, and also they're going to start opening up direct flights between the Lid airport and I believe Rabat, if I'm not incorrect.
Yeah, they're going to have a direct flight. But I want to comment on something you said, that the United States is the only Western country, but that won't be for long. I mean, that's what they're banking on, that the EU will follow, other countries will follow, and then, of course, other countries beholden to the United States diplomacy will follow. But what's more important, you said something, the United States, which many people don't know, has the largest CIA base just right outside Tangier, not too far from Tangier, actually, about, I would say, 40 minutes, from Tangier. This is a military zone. You cannot even drive by it. You cannot take pictures by it. It's all fenced in. It has been there for years. This is the largest listening post to entire Africa. That's all. That's. I've actually seen the base from a distance many years ago, and was told you can't go that route. As I was traveling outside Tangier, and there is a small town called Asila there. It's not too far from Asila. So basically, the Israeli Mossad will be operating right out of that base to the rest of Africa.
Right.
I mean, it'll be a collaboration. So this is really a very major strategic move, aside from everything else, but it looks right on kind of, the diplomatic relations, the commercial relations, etc. But this is a real strategic foothold for the
Americans and the Israelis.
Well, the Americans already have that. For the Israelis to have in northern Africa. If you're in Morocco, you cover Tunisia, you cover Algeria, you cover
all of North Africa.
All of North Africa and south of that. And that's why the United States has this. And as you know, that's also not too far Tangier. Tangier is a very short ride by ferry to Spain and to the rest of Europe. It's a very, very strategic point, and this is a point that gives you access to not only Africa, but also the Mediterranean and the Atlantic.
Okay, so here's the question to chew on a little bit, Jamal, because in diplomatic history, in terms of the United States transitioning from one administration to another, big diplomatic decisions like this are never taken after an election, before an inauguration. Of course, the Trump administration is going to completely flaunt this, especially if as they're trying to do and as they've done, tried to cut as many deals for the Israelis as possible during this interim period. My question to you, and maybe for a little discussion, will Joe Biden support this, or will he try to upend or annul or change or modify this agreement that the Trump administration has curried between the Israelis and the Moroccans?
He's not going to do anything. Once this becomes fait accompli, he's not going to reverse it, because he's going to say, well, this is great for peace. We want more Arab countries to have peace with Israel. So this is not against. It's never been against Joe Biden's diplomacy or the Obama at the time or anyone else. It just wasn't made possible because you didn't have those two, I would say, heads communicating on the same frequency. One in the White House, Donald Trump, and
Sure.
Benjamin Netanyahu. So
But
even Obama had his differences with Netanyahu.
Sure, but here's the difference, Jamal. Under Obama and when previous administrations, because this quid pro quo to give up Western Sahara to Morocco in exchange for diplomatic relations with the Israelis has been on the table for a long time. No previous American administration was willing to throw the Western Sahara under the bus to Morocco in exchange for relations between Israel and Morocco. So the question, just to refine it diplomatically, and Biden has to deal with a progressive flank now within his administration. So the question becomes, and there are progressive elements within the Democratic Party who are completely against this. So you're basically saying, even though this is going to upend some of the fragile relations with the progressive elements of the Democratic Party and the Biden administration, he too will throw Western Sahara under the bus for this.
Yeah, I don't see any other way for Joe Biden, including, for example, people are hopeful that he will, for one thing, I think the most egregious thing is annulling the annexation of the Golan Heights. I don't think he'll do that. The other thing, moving the embassy into Jerusalem. I don't think he'll move it back to Tel Aviv. They've already said what they were going to do, meaning the Biden-Harris administration. They've said that they will reinvigorate the consulate, because the consulate, before you had the embassy in Tel Aviv and you had in Jerusalem, the consulate that took care of Palestinian affairs, American citizens, Palestinian American citizens, others, outside, right from Jerusalem, and now they have downgraded it to an office. I forgot, a consular, something like just to take care of visas and what have you. They'll upgrade it. They'll bring it back, because we've always had a consulate there for ages, the United States. Something like this they'll do, but they won't reverse, for example, moving the embassy back. I don't think they're going to reverse any of these agreements. Maybe they are not going to push for further, basically undermining the Palestinian Authority, because all these things are kind of circumventing the Palestinian Authority, which we will be talking about it soon.
Right. I don't believe that Biden will, as a person, because he has said loudly, you don't have to be Jewish to be a Zionist. He is as pro-Israeli as you can get in the Democratic Party. Really, he is. And he doesn't have the nuanced appreciation for the long-standing oppression and occupation of Palestinian land for over 72 years. He just doesn't. But there are these more progressive elements within the Democratic Party that have been mildly irritated with some of his picks so far for cabinet positions and for high-level positions within his administration. Kamala Harris has been surprisingly quiet about all of these moves having to do with Israel and the Trump administration, which we'll have plenty to talk about over the next 4 years, I'm sure. I think it's fair to say that, this is full steam ahead for the Kushner-Trump diplomatic efforts to enhance the Israeli strategic reach into the Arab world and to normalize relations, but it will cost Biden a lot within the Democratic Party and within the progressive elements of the Democratic Party. We'll see how it unfolds over the next 4 years.
That's right. And remember, just one final thing about Morocco. The king of Morocco is very close to the king of, the crown prince, Mohammed bin Salman. And he would not have done this move without his approval. And that's kind of the role Saudi Arabia plays in the region. And remember, the normalization idea is now it's not a strange thing that eventually it will happen, because the Arabs at the Arab League, they've accepted King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia, the late King Abdullah's proposition, which was total normalization, meaning all Arab countries, all 22 Arab countries and some Muslim countries will normalize relations eventually with Israel, as long as Israel pulls out of the West Bank and honors Resolution 242, etc. So that was the basis. So now what happens, what they're doing, basically Trump and Kushner, they're putting the horse, the cart in front of the horse. So they're giving Israel everything. And then now that's going to leave no negotiation power to the Palestinians or the Palestinian Authority.
Exactly. It continues to weaken what the weak hand that Palestinians had anyways, Jamal. I mean, the hand under the Trump administration that Palestinians had never been weaker. And we'll talk about this later in terms of the PA and the PLO have never been weaker. This weakens it further. I do want to add one quick thing before we transition to our next topic, is that it was interesting that there seems to be a little conflict in the House of Saud, because even though they're trying to get as many people to normalize relations with the Israelis, I think I don't know who it was, Jamal. It was one of the princes in Saudi Arabia, one of the high princes, came out being very critical of the Israelis at a meeting in the Gulf recently. So MBS's and Kushner's plan to kind of normalize because the big prize, Jamal, the big prize for Kushner et al. Is really normalizing relations with Saudi Arabia. So there seems to be some tension within the House of Saud right now.
That's right. You're listening to Arab Talk on KPOO San Francisco, 89.5 FM. I want to shift gears here a little bit. We're staying, actually, we're going to keep talking about Palestine and Israel for the entire show. Here we go again. 13-year-old Ali Abu Aliya succumbed to his wounds just a few days ago.
It's tragic.
After he was shot with live rounds in the stomach, Jess, by Israeli police north of Ramallah. And he's a young teenager. He was involved in a weekly peaceful protest against illegal Israeli settlements at Al-Mughayir village near Ramallah.
Right.
And as you recall, in May this year, Israeli police also shot dead an autistic Palestinian young man in Jerusalem's old city. So Israel continues to target Palestinian children and youth unabated. I mean, here we're talking about, this is a distraction. We're talking about the normalization with Morocco, and no mention about this cold-blooded murder of a 13-year-old boy. I mean, imagine if this happened to an Israeli or anyone around the world, there'll be an outcry. And in the case of the autistic young man in Jerusalem, they basically slapped the policeman on the wrist and said, "Oh, oops, it's a mistake."
Well, Jamal, we have to face this really painful reality as we kind of negotiate the transition away from the Trump-Kushner diplomatic efforts. And, we alluded to this before in terms of at no time since the Oslo agreements has the Palestinian Authority and Palestinian political infrastructure been any weaker on the international stage, on the local stage in terms of other Arab countries and with the United States. I mean, basically, and we could say this literally and figuratively, the United States allows Israel to get away with murder. They allow Israel to get away with murder literally by murdering Palestinian children, and figuratively they let Israel get away with murder by moving the embassy, by doing all these things, continuing to steal Palestinian land without accountability and without any consequences. To me, this killing of this assassination and murder of this young man really sets the table, even though we know this is, Biden's general idea is not to change anything. It'll be interesting to see how much the Biden administration allows the Israelis to get away with in the context of getting away with murder for the last 4 years.
I mean, I would take it even further than this, just because not only the U.S. Administration is allowing Israel to get away with this, the media also in the United States allowing Israel, giving Israel basically a free hand
pass
in doing these, and also to a certain extent the EU, because I was trying to look to see what happened when this occurred, because the EU has representation right in Jerusalem. They have an office.
Right.
And they just said, "Oh, we're gonna investigate this. This should be investigated." This was their kind of the strongest statement, saying that it should be investigated. Outside NGOs and human rights organizations, which called this as it should be a war crime.
Yes.
The EU said, "Oh, this should be investigated." I mean, this is the extent. And
it means nothing, Jamal. We know that. It means nothing.
So the EU's representative in Jerusalem, EU's representative to Palestine, basically, that's the statement that was issued on behalf of the EU. The United Nations is basically in Palestine is non-existent now because of the UNRWA actually has been shutting down its offices because they don't have money.
Right.
And of course, on top of this, we could add the big urgency around the globe, which is the pandemic. So when you kill a Palestinian here and there, a Palestinian boy, and you said Israel always takes advantages either with the last weeks of an outgoing administration, or now be it the pandemic, which, by the way, Israel has secured its allotment of Pfizer vaccine.
Of course.
And others.
More than the United States.
Zero for the Palestinians.
Of course.
So they've ordered just enough for Israeli citizens, even though Israel controls the land between the Mediterranean Sea and the Jordan River. So they basically are in the West Bank. They have enough vaccines for their settlers in the West Bank, but not Palestinians. Enough. I mean, think about this absurd and crazy mentality.
Well, it's not even absurd and crazy. It's morally bankrupt. It's a particular kind of war crime that they've been committing in Gaza too, Jamal, which is never to allow enough medical supplies, medications, treatment to really protect a community. But the thing that's really stupid about this, if they don't vaccinate Palestinians, and if Palestinians go unvaccinated, it's not as if that's not going to have a significant negative impact on the settlers and the Israelis also, because, the virus doesn't know about the wall and the virus doesn't know about checkpoints, and it will continue to wreak havoc among Israelis and Israeli settlers. So even though it's a cruel and immoral move on the part of the Israeli Ministry of Health, it will backfire ultimately on all Israelis.
It's totally immoral. I mean, and it's in line with Israel's colonial idea of they are only interested in the land, but not the population. Just grab the land. I mean, here they have transferred 800,000 settlers basically now. 700,000 to 800,000 settlers have been transferred into the West Bank, which has a population of 2.8 million Palestinians.
Right.
And they're going to only have enough 800,000 basically doses just for the settlers, but not for the Palestinians. I mean, who are in most cases are 5 kilometers apart. In certain cases, 3 kilometers apart.
That's right.
And they're just
That's right.
I mean, we're talking about apartheid in its fullest. This is, I think, new to apartheid because we've talked in the past about apartheid using separate roads, separate laws. But now, even when it comes to the vaccine, they are basically not giving vaccine to the Palestinians.
Yeah, and that kind of immorality speaks to the immorality of the Israeli healthcare system, the doctors who are complicit, the Israeli doctors who are complicit with a system that denies Palestinians equal access to healthcare. And, you know, the Palestinians most certainly are going to die from not being vaccinated from this. That's also a direct result of the Israeli immorality and complicity in this. But as I said, Jamal, you know, the virus doesn't care about checkpoints. The virus doesn't care about apartheid practices.
It doesn't distinguish between people.
It's gonna, you know, and the Israelis, despite their immorality, this virus will continue to haunt them if they continue down this path.
So talking about racism, because that's basically racism, you know, to simplify it.
Yeah.
We've talked in the past about the most racist team, soccer team, or as the rest of the world will call it, football team in the world.
It's an Israeli team.
Unfortunately, it's in my hometown of Jerusalem.
That's right.
It's called the Beitar Jerusalem. This is the most racist team acknowledged by the FIFA, by all soccer lovers around the world.
Oh, but they're booed every time they go
that's
anywhere.
When they go outside. So this team, I mean, this is the absurdity, and this will bring us back to normalization, right? So this is a football team. Not only the team is racist, but all its fans are racist. You won't see Palestinians going to the stadium. It's mostly Meir Kahane followers.
That's right.
You know, really ultra fascist right followers who go there and they go into a frenzy, basically chanting death to Arabs, screaming epithets such as a terrorist when there is an Arab, because, you know, the Israeli football teams around, soccer teams around the country have a lot of Arab players. In fact, the team Sakhnin in the Palestinian village of Sakhnin won the Israeli national championship.
That's right.
So they get a lot of their good players, and so when another player, let's say, playing on Maccabi Tel Aviv or another Israeli football team plays in Jerusalem, and if there is an Arab, they start chanting terrorist, death to the Arabs. That actually, few years ago, Beitar Jerusalem, they basically purchased the contract of 2 Muslim players from Chechnya, because, you know, they also got foreign players in 2013, and the fans went berserk, throwing things at them, attacking them, spitting at them. They made their lives miserable, because what they say that their slogan is forever pure. I'm translating from Hebrew. That's their slogan for them. They want just a pure Jewish team, Jewish players, everything there, forever pure. So these poor players, I forgot their names, they basically moved on somewhere else. They couldn't stand it. They had a contract. They had to kind of like walk away from their contract, right? So fast forward to the year 2020 and to the normalization. Here comes Sheikh Hamad bin Khalifa al-Nahyan. You know who's Sheikh Hamad bin Khalifa al-Nahyan, Jess? Who he is?
Yeah, he's one of the Emirati princes, isn't he? He's one of the top. He's one of the richest of the Emirati princes, isn't he?
He is the cousin of Mohammed bin Zayed, the crown prince. and the de facto ruler of the United Arab Emirates. So it cannot get any higher than that. He's
Right.
from the royal family. He's not a brother. He's not a brother, but he is a very close cousin. They have a lot of cousins. They're sheikhs. They call them sheikh there instead of a prince, but it's almost like the title of a prince. Has a lot of money, and guess what did he do? He purchased 50% stake of this team. He's now a partner in the most racist team in the
That hates
entire world.
Arabs. So let's get this straight, Jamal. An Arab bought a team, half of a team, that hates Arabs.
Yep.
So what does that make the sheikh, who is now fully supporting up to 50% of his oil wealth, to support a racist team that hates the very people that he is? That's a kind of psychological state which is hard to explain. It goes way beyond any kind of normalization. It's a psychological twist of this sheikh's mind that he feels fine about making an investment in a team that basically hates who he is.
Yeah, and this is, I would say, this is part of the absurdity of the normalization. I mean, we understand now there is normalization between Israel and the UAE. They have flights, between the UAE and Tel Aviv. Emirates Airlines flying, or its subsidiary flying into Tel Aviv, and so Al is also flying there, and all these things happening. But and if you want to make an investment, I mean, this is kind of the crazy thing. I try to understand the logic. If you want to make an investment, I mean, why do you pick an investment that represents basically racism? I mean, is this a message they're trying to say, well, we're going to normalize? Like, is he that crazy to think?
Yes.
By purchasing 50% of the team now, people there who I've actually encountered these people who hate Palestinians, who are racist. I mean, they're basically the Ku Klux Klan of Israel, and that's not an exaggeration.
I have a theory. They're
going to change their mind now?
No, I have a theory. My theory is that, again, as with a lot of these sheikhs and a lot of these, normalizationists, they have this delusional fantasy that if they do this special thing with the Israelis will embrace them and establish more business relationships with them. So it may be that the sheikh has the same delusion that King Abdullah had, that General Sisi has, that the King of Morocco has, that MBS may have, this delusion somehow that if they do these deals and normalize relations with the Israelis, that good things economically will happen to them. I have breaking news for all of them, Jamal. The Israelis don't care about them. They will throw them under the bus, take their money and throw them under the bus as quickly as they can. And I think we have to understand when we say normalization, Jamal, and this is an important point, it's really not normalization between peoples of these countries or these, it's not the people of the Emirates or the people in Saudi Arabia or the people in Jordan never have fond feelings toward these racist oppressors. It's really the top echelon. It's the kings, it's the sheikhs, it's the princes, it's the presidents. Because on the ground, Jamal, and you know this as well as anybody, this never flies with people on the ground.
No, it doesn't fly with people on the ground. And I said this is part of the absurdity of doing something like this, thinking that, maybe this delusion, if we purchase a racist team, a team that both its players, its ownership, its fans hate Arabs, we can change
and
their
Muslims.
mind.
And Muslims.
That we can change their mind. I mean, I don't know who's their business advisors, who's their psychological advisors, but we know better. We Palestinians have lived there long enough to know that you cannot change these type of people's minds, just the same that we're seeing the remnants of racism in the United States from people who have been waving for years the Confederacy flag and so forth, that this kind of concept of superiority continued. And so now it kind of got me thinking, and this is one thing that I don't have the answer for, Jess, is now we can break down all these countries that Trump and company have managed to turn and have them basically accept these agreements, and what are the incentives. The UAE, the big incentive was what? Getting the planes, right? Getting the advanced F-35s.
But that was killed this week by the Congress.
Well, I'm trying to look at this, and then this whole idea when the prince came to the White House and said that, oh, we're doing it because we care about the Palestinians and we're going to manage to stop the annexation. That was all a farce, because Israel and Netanyahu have not stopped anything.
No,
so
they've accelerated.
They accelerated things. And so I don't know about the planes, but at least we know, sign the peace agreement, you get the most advanced planes the United States has to offer. Okay.
Well, I'm sorry, there's a correction to what I said. Even though the Congress voted against it, the Senate overturned that, and they're preparing to send the planes to the UAE, by the way, still, Jamal. There's still some...
Okay, well, we don't know. I mean, but at least there was an incentive, and we know the real incentive. That's the real incentive. It's not like, oh, I feel bad for the Palestinians, I want to help them out. At least come out and say, that's why we did it. Yeah. Morocco, we know the incentive. I mean, the king and his father before him, for years, they have been dealing with the Western Sahara issue, unsuccessful in many cases. They offered them autonomy, and people from the Western Sahara, they want independence, right? So now you have the United States giving him the big stamp of approval, the most powerful country in the world, giving him, that's what he believes. What happened in Israel, he's emulating what the Israelis have done in the West Bank and in the Golan Heights. So we understand that incentive. Sudan is a failed state, and Sudan is on the brinks of bankruptcy, and also they have these sanctions basically that just killed the country, and also a lot of its leadership still, even though after the departure of their former president, they are wanted for war crimes and different things. So now the incentive was like, recognize Israel, and now you can come back to the bosom of the international community, and you can come and fly and sleep maybe in the Lincoln bedroom at the White House. So that's the incentive, right? So we know now what Sudan, I tell you, probably if anyone had a more serious incentive than anyone, it's Sudan, because they're on the brink of starvation. They have nothing. So they need money. They need recognition. They need people to allow them to trade. They have tons of back-breaking sanctions. The one I don't understand is Bahrain. That's what I'm coming. Bahrain, I have yet to find an incentive besides protection. But the United States gives protection to all these sheikhs and princes and kings throughout the Gulf. I mean, the United States needs Bahrain probably more than Bahrain needs the United States in a way, as far as strategic and as far as giving it protection. But I haven't seen an incentive. What are they getting out of it?
Yeah, that's a good question, Jamal.
I was thinking maybe what they're going to get out of it. They're going to put a Disneyland in Bahrain?
No, maybe. I mean, the United States does have a lot of intelligence operatives in Bahrain. They have a base in Bahrain.
Yeah, but they also do have that in Qatar. They have it in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, I think it's just. I actually think it's just part of this political move in terms of branding and in terms of marketing. The Kushner, Trump, Netanyahu idea of, normalization. They don't care about the country. They care about the number of countries. So they can point to, oh, we have 5 countries now. We have Bahrain, we have UAE, we have Morocco, we have Jordan, we have Egypt. So it's part of most likely it's part of this kind of keeping score of how many
That's on the
how many
United
countries.
States side, but for Bahrain itself, that's what I'm talking about. And even when you talk about the Camp David Accords and the Egyptian Israeli peace deal, Egypt got a lot of money. Israel got
Billions.
a lot of money. Jordan got a lot of money. So it was like a lot of money. They got billions and billions. Because
I'm not sure what Bahrain's going to get out of this.
And that's what I say. I don't see what's the rush into doing this, especially since the population is against it. I mean, if any country had more demonstrations, and I've been monitoring its press and people and its dissidents, they are really against this deal.
It's interesting that you bring that up, Jamal, because Bahrain has been really vilified in Europe because of the oppression that the royal family has been, conducting against its population and its citizens. There's a big race that occurs in Bahrain every year, an F1 Formula One race, and it's routinely criticized throughout Europe that the Formula One group decides to race in Bahrain when so many human rights atrocities are occurring. I think it's a great...
And Bahrain was one of the countries in the so-called Arab Spring,
right,
where people were looking for a regime change. And if it wasn't for the interference of Saudi Arabia, the king wouldn't be there in Bahrain. I mean, Bahrain was on the brink of collapse, and then Saudi Arabia had to send military troops to protect the king, and because of its treatment of the Shiite population there and inequity in the country.
Maybe the Israelis have some dirt on the king.
No, that's what I'm saying. The only thing I see, I mean, the protection, well, he gets the protection from the United States and from Saudi Arabia. I mean, that's kind of, he's an extension of Saudi Arabia. But
unless he's being squeezed by MBS.
That's the only thing I feel like maybe he's being squeezed. It's kind of an experiment. They want to make sure they have more countries in the Gulf, because Kuwait adamantly rejects any kind of normalization. Qatar rejected normalization, although I'm suspicious now, since as of recently, Qatar is normalizing its relationship with Saudi Arabia, because they had before issues, and now anyway, we'll keep an eye on this. Our last story, Jess, is the resignation of
it's big news.
Prominent Palestinian politician Hanan Ashrawi, who has yesterday really confirmed her resignation from the executive committee of the Palestine Liberation Organization, the PLO, after she's been there for more than a decade. And it kind of happened in a weird way. Just in essence, we weren't supposed to know about this resignation. She's met with President Mahmoud Abbas and sent a letter of resignation, and the deal between them that she'll announce it towards the end of the year, like she'll finish her term. And then someone leaked it.
Interesting.
That's why she was very upset. That's why she tweeted a whole letter out explaining her resignation. And initially, which I'm actually a believer in this, or I think that might be the case. I don't know all the details. But she was pretty upset about the normalization that's going, the security coordination now between the Palestinian Authority and the Israelis. After
it's back on the table.
Yeah, after they said, this is it, we learned our lesson, we're severing all ties with Israel, blah, blah, blah. And here we go again. They got nothing, by the way. There is nothing.
Nothing.
Israel has not withdrawn an inch from the West Bank.
Nor have they gotten their tax. Have the
No,
Palestinians
they actually
gotten
got a
their?
payment recently.
Oh, maybe that's
might
it.
And then they say they've returned to security coordination, and all of a sudden they're now back to security coordination. And some people who leaked this memo, the resignation, said that kind of was the last straw that broke the camel's back with her. We don't know. She denied it. She said, no. She, in her statement, and I'm reading, she said that, here are some excerpts. The Palestinian political system needs renewal and reinvigoration with the inclusion of youth, women, and additional qualified professionals. It's incumbent upon us all to assume our individual responsibilities and to carry out our duties with honesty and integrity, including by facilitating this needed change.
It's a non-statement, Jamal. Doesn't say anything.
So, I don't know.
Non-statement.
A lot of people say that was kind of what kind of pushed her over
Yeah, it makes
the edge.
sense. But we have to keep in mind, in terms of the history of Palestinian politics post-Oslo, Hanan Ashrawi really is someone who historically was able to make the bridge between Palestine and the West. You know, she routinely was on television being interviewed. She is extremely smart, very articulate. I think she's trilingual, and really well represented, at least to the Western and English-speaking communities of the West. She was one person who could clearly speak and speak well on behalf of Palestinians. And it's really a shame that she had to go out in this way. And it's, you know, for the Palestinians to reestablish security coordination is beyond insulting and disrespectful, not just to Hanan, but to every single Palestinian. So, you know, it kind of makes sense to me that, you know, after all these years of disrespect, she had to say no. Khalas.
Well, I mean, here's the thing. The only thing that I keep in the back of my mind just is that this could be temporary, because I've seen this play
Right.
in the
Right.
past. This
Right.
kind of her partner, basically at the PLO, the late Saeb Erekat, you know, Saeb Erekat passed away recently. He must have
COVID.
resigned half a dozen times
Right.
that I know of, if not more.
Right.
Every time he got upset with Abu Mazen, he resigned, or they didn't like something, he resigned. And then a couple of weeks later, a month later, he kind of resurfaced like nothing had happened.
Right.
So I have to wait
Maybe.
and see. I have to wait and see if this is also like something. Yeah, they said that Mahmoud Abbas accepted her resignation, but I have to say I have to wait and see, like at least a month or two, to see if she won't resurface in another capacity. And that's in a way, I'm not taking away things from her, but that's the kind of the sad status of the Palestinian leadership, is this continuous revolving door, and you don't have
And backdoor.
and
backdoor.
you don't have that change of the guards. It's like reshuffling the same people who don't kind of, want to move out from their office. That she's been there, even though, I mean, to me, if she has an issue with what's happening on the ground with the Oslo, that she's basically one of the early teams, I mean, one of the architects of Oslo. She must have seen the writing on the wall for many, many years, all the failures, all the lack of any kind of advancements and deterioration of the Palestinian situation, no election going on there, and the settlements growing, that she should have thrown the towel probably earlier and said,
But and I think to Hanan's credit, Jamal, I mean, yeah, she's politically has there's some stains, obviously, in terms of her work on the Oslo Agreement. But I think her attitude has been like many Palestinians when they face these crises, political and maybe ethical crises. they ultimately decide, or they have to decide, is it better to resign and not be associated at all, or is it better to at least have a seat at the table? And I think historically for Hanan, she's tended to be on the side of, it's better at least that I have a seat at the table to express myself rather than, not. But, I think your analysis is spot on. Who knows? Maybe we'll see something different because, you never know what's going to happen in Palestine. Hey, we only have, I think, a few minutes, Jamal. I wanted to just let people know about the COVID pandemic, just a couple of things to our listeners and our viewers, especially those who pay attention in the United States. You need to know that the hype about the vaccine, you need to be very careful. Unfortunately, the Trump administration turned down an opportunity to buy 100 million more doses of the Pfizer vaccine. And now it looks like there will not be enough vaccine to inoculate and to vaccinate all Americans by it probably won't even happen till the end of the second or third quarter of 2021, Jamal. So ongoing catastrophic failures when it comes to the Trump administration handling of the pandemic, but what it means for you and me and our communities and in California and the rest of this country, it means that we're in for a tough next 6 to 8 months.
Well, yeah, that's terrible. Even though they claim that they have purchased from others like Moderna and AstraZeneca,
they're not ready. No, they're
not ready. So
they're not approved. They're not ready. And remember, to inoculate 300 million people, you need 600 million doses, because there's only one vaccine that is one dose, and that's the Johnson & Johnson. That's not close yet. All the others are double dose. So to think that we're going to get 640 million doses anytime soon is delusional.
So it looks like it's going to take up to probably the end of the summer, right?
I would say the end of the summer, and then we have the second issue, Jamal, where they did polling, and they think that about 50 to 55% of Americans are not even trusting of a vaccine to take it. And just to let our listeners and viewers know, in order for the vaccine to be effective, to get the so-called herd immunity, you need about 75 to 80% of people to take the vaccine, both doses. So there's a lot of things still happening that are really
Well, they have to pass a law. Basically, I don't think you have the option when you send your kids to school, if your kid is not vaccinated, let's say.
You can get the religious exemption still.
You still can't do that because
yeah, you still can.
I sent my kid to school. I mean, this has been many, many years ago. Look at all the gray hair, right? So I can't remember all the details, but I knew that we had to provide all his vaccination shots before he got.
Okay, that's private school.
Allowed to attend
private schools.
No. That was public. That was public school. So you have to come up with to show that you have all.
Unless you have a doctor's note, or you have a religious exemption.
Well, I didn't know that part,
but here's the problem: if people don't take the vaccine, we're going to be in the midst of the pandemic for a very long time, Jamal. That's the real issue.
Well, we're coming to another end of Arab Talk. Make sure to go to our website, arabtalkradio.com, to download the latest episodes. And make sure you wear your mask.
Wear your mask, please.
And we're here for kind of a rough ride for the next few months.
But Arab Talk will continue.
The promised land yet.
No, and we're not going to do it soon, but we'll remain committed to our viewers and our listeners, Jamal, and we'll see you all next week.
See you next week.